so near to them. And so there's a special limitation before you to do a 6-foot tall berm within a landscape easement of 40 foot wide. That exceeds anything that we have in code by quite a bit. So you'd have buffer landscaping within a 40 foot wide easement along the entire north boundary of the property. That's 330 feet of length. There would be a break in that 6-foot tall berm for their driveway, but it really came down to the property can be developed anytime, can be developed today, could have already been developed, will one day be developed, and the zoning is industrial. So if the rezone were to fail, then it will be developed. If the rezone is approved with these special limitations, then there'll be those special limitations I talked about. I don't know that satisfied the neighbors. We talked about some things. One lady wanted to know, why is downzoning not on the table? Why is elimination of this residential zoning strip along the north part of the property the only thing that's at issue? Why can't the assembly change the zoning from industrial down to residential? They'd like that, and that's not this is privately owned land. It's industrial zoned. The request before the assembly is not to rezone from industrial to residential. It's to take this 69-foot wide strip along the north part of the property and make it match the rest of 90% of the rest of the property. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. That's all I can think of right now.
Thank you, Mr. Whittleton, then Mr. Delmar.
So this is, I think I had an amendment somewhere on this to change some of this wording, so maybe that doesn't count now, but one is on A4, trees and shrubs shall be evenly distributed along the frontage. I don't see any wording here that says you have to need access, because that would be, access is pretty extensive, it'd be 20 feet wide minimum, I think.
Yeah.
Do we need some wording in here to address that?
No, it's in our code, it's set up that driveways are allowed to cross perpendicular across landscape easements. That's a matter of course for our code.
Okay, so when you use the phrase in A, screening landscaping refers technically to a certain kind of landscaping, and that discussion in the codes that includes.
Yeah, I just said earlier it would be buffer landscaping, but screening landscaping is like highway screening landscaping. It's even more landscaping than buffers required, so I misspoke. But to your question, yes, any driveway can cross a landscape easement anywhere through town. And the landscape easements and landscaping is on their site perimeter landscaping, right? But of course, we don't deny access to businesses and homes and that sort of thing. So that's it. It's in the code to cross it.
Obvious to you that, but this is somewhat to speak to neighbors too. They may think, oh, it's a ball. Hey, it's not. You got a big hole.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, you might want to think about that just to make it overt for people. B, berm of no less than 6 feet is good, but this phrase, and I remember when I did my amendment, was to clarify this: vegetation that unless otherwise preserved. And I don't think anyone could quite figure out what that meant when we deleted that phrase.
So, Mr. Weddleton, what I recall is that sometime after we had the postponement at the assembly meeting, you emailed me and said, Francis, can you prepare an amendment, Weddleton 1 amendment that would clean up some of the clumsy language in here. And I wrote an amendment that revised these special limitations, that kept the intent and the substance, but just cleaned up the language. Your response back to me was that that did more than just this little B. I also sort of fixed up the language in A, and that was too much, so you weren't going to do it. So based on that email, and I think that maybe you didn't spend a lot of time on this, I think maybe you were sort of pulled in different places, but so I responded to you, I'm sorry, I did more than what you asked. Let me do exactly what you asked. And so I prepared a second amendment that only tricked out this B to fix the wording only in that one spot. So 2 amendments I've emailed to you, and I could go back to the office and resend them to you, but that wouldn't be a bad idea to,
Yeah, no, thanks. I'm sure your memory's more clear.
I remember this really clearly because you're.
But this phrase here, vegetation unless, I still don't know what that means. You may have at some point fathomed it out. So that's something, if you could find so you did better.
I think so, yeah.
Perhaps we could find.
So the reason why this is clumsy language is, so the commission made a recommendation. They made some amendments to our recommended special limitations to increase it to 40 feet from 30 feet, and that sort of thing. And then that's what it got adopted in their resolution. And we're required to carry forward exactly what the commission recommended to you, and that's what you have here. And so I see that the wording's not great. Yes, I can send you that floor amendment, which again doesn't change the substance, but just cleans up the language for the driveway issue and this preserved thing.
Okay, and then on C, vehicular access to residential streets is prohibited. I know that's important, it's a big thing, but it seems fairly broad, because vehicles, I mean, you could have people who work there live in the neighborhood, or people drive through there to get to work. I mean, that means all vehicles. And I think the key thing was the trucks or commercial vehicles.
Yeah.
And isn't that our limit? Where do we have permits? My goal when we dealt with that is so that, because the traffic engineer can get permits to use neighborhood road for different commercial uses. So the goal here wasn't no cars so much, but that to signal to the traffic engineer, don't give them a permit to use heavy trucks on their neighborhood road. So I think we had some wording that got more of that.
In the amendment that I prepared, I revised that sentence. I don't know if Dave, you want to speak to that, or I can, either one of us. Okay. What I would say to that is, because I think it's sort of in plain language, there's a special limitation here that says vehicle access to residential streets is prohibited. So 92nd Avenue is an arterial street, okay? But Vernon is a residential street. Title 9 of, which is not Title 21, but Title 9 already says that trucks of 12,000 gross pounds of gross vehicle axle weight are not allowed to drive down residential streets. So this is kind of a feel-good special limitation. It's kind of an odd special limitation because you're already not allowed to take big trucks down residential streets, but folks wanted this in the special limitation so that it was sort of put the owner on notice, so that this property owner, that his district, it would say as part of the special limitation, a reminder. So it's kind of like, you can't ever, if this gets developed for industrial, you can't take your trucks down Vernon. And these guys, when they started cutting down trees, did do that, and it totally incensed the neighborhood. There's a lot of blowback over that. So.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, I'll follow up to that. But first, I think, so we haven't closed the public testimony on this, have we? Did we close it, or do we continue it?
I think that it's open, but people can't testify a second time. There was one lady that I think is going to wait and testify at Tuesday night's meeting.
Well, I mean, but that speaks to, that's version as well. But that speaks to the fact that you didn't amend it because you couldn't have amended it, right?
Right. No, I had stuff that.
You just asked me to prepare an amendment after the fact.
Or at our work session, we discussed it.
You were just talking about the folks using their heavy trucks down the residential road. I'm glad this is in there, even though, as you said, our code already prevents it. What were the consequences for them doing that? You said that they actually did it, the neighbors reported it. Do you know what the consequences were for them for doing it?
Well, there was certainly, it's caused a lot of problems with this whole rezone because it's been used as a club for that mistake.
But I guess is enforcement in that case done by traffic,
APD.
by APD?
So there's two types of enforcement. Title IX is enforced by APD,
okay.
And then if there's ever a haul route or a building permit that shows this, that if there's a permit in on this property and the trucks that are doing some sort of activity on this property use a residential street, then that could create a lot of problems for their permit.
Okay.
Because we have a stick holding over them. That's the way it was explained to me by the Building Safety Division.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I have 3 questions, and that was my first one, the penalties in regards to vehicle access. And so, if I heard correctly, I think you said that being tied to the permit is...
If there is a permit,
if there's a permit.
Outstanding, like if they went to build a building or something like that.
Okay.
That's right.
More so than tracking to traffic code, although it does, there is like specific fines associated with going through residential, or I mean that's in a different section of the code. Right?
Yeah, I'm not sure how APD would
Okay.
enforce Title IX. I spoke with the
Right.
building, some of the folks in the Building Safety Division about if there's a permit for building permit or a land use permit for activity on the property, and trucks from that site go down Vernon, then the permit could be revoked. There could be additional
Okay.
conditions placed on them.
Okay, so if residents would see this, probably they would take photos.
Yeah.
And call APD then? Or
Yeah.
Call, okay. And so 2 other questions from residents. One question came up in regards to providing an incentive to rezone to residential.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know there's no way to say, like, we'll waive the fees or something, should the petitioner decide to, no, okay, all right.
Well, you could ask the property owner's representative if you like. Mr. Grenier is in the audience. I mean, I think
Okay.
he's going to echo that. Yeah, that's not really on the table. They purchased the property with the intent of developing it for industrial use.
Okay, and third question, which was also from a resident, is a request actually to add a statement in here, to amend it, to either add a whereas to recognize the frustration of the residents and perhaps even the petitioner arising from an earlier zoning decision that did not include a transition between industrial use and residential. I mean, that sounds like that may be unorthodox and not directly related to the zoning decision. However, it is a request from the residents that if there's some way to add language to acknowledge the frustration or what some of them consider to be, I mean, I don't know what kind of language that would look like, or if you've ever had a request like that, but basically to acknowledge that putting residential next to and right up against industrial without a transition is a bad idea.
Whereas the neighborhood has strong concerns about industrial zoning adjacent to
Okay.
A residential neighborhood, this should be avoided with future rezones or whenever possible. Now, there's 2 things maybe that might speak to assistance to the neighborhood in that respect. Our zoning code has a list of industrial uses, and many of them, most of the most noxious ones, have a separation distance of 1,000 feet from a residential district. So if you wanted to have a bulk storage of hazardous material, you couldn't do it because while the right-of-way is 100 or 120 feet, 92nd Avenue, it's less than 1,000 feet. And we have a bunch of these uses that you cannot do the use if the use is within 1,000 feet of a residential district, a residential property line. And so those property or those types of uses won't be allowed in this property.
Okay. Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Would you support adding language like that to this?
Well, it's already in the code so Title 21 is the regulations prohibit certain uses. Could that be added as a phrase in a finding or of a whereas clause? Sure.
Okay, but so you would support the whereas clause that you stated about the neighborhood having strong concerns?
Oh, sure.
Okay,
Sure.
would you then work with me on an amendment
Oh, yeah.
for that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to work on that.
Okay,
That's
thank
fine.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So I have Mr. Weddleton, then Mr. Schutte, and then do you want in? Okay, so then Mr. Gates. Mr. Weddleton.
Well, just speaking to Suzanne's point on the whereas, I think if you had whereas, the neighborhood's so close to industrial, and that's not currently what we allow, really. We do have buffers. And speak to why this leads to these special limitations, because this is substantially more buffer than you see in the typical thing. So why is it there? Because of that kind of long
Right.
decades ago error, really.
Okay.
So your whereas kind of backs up these special limitations. So I think it's a close tie.
Okay.
And regarding the explosive stuff like the fuel and stuff like that, those separation distances only apply if it's privately owned land. If it's government owned land at the port, you can put it right below the house.
Thank you. Mr. Schutte.
I was just going to say what Assemblymember Weddleton did, which is the whereas clause really speaks to the conditions that are being placed on the property, the buffer, et cetera. So crafting, Francis, when you're thinking about crafting it, have that be sort of the whereas statement that helps explain how we're getting to the final site configuration, if you will, of the property.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Gates.
Thank you. And since we're centered on a whereas paragraph that Mr. McLaughlin draft, which I think is perfectly fine, I just wanted to mention it seems the concern is having this as part of the permanent legislative record for the C-zone application and approval. Another way to do that is to do an assembly memorandum, perhaps from Ms. LaFrance. You could just explain, came to council meeting if you wanted to. And an AM doesn't have to be necessarily the sponsor of the ordinance, and you could put an AM adopting ordinance and include it as part of the permanent legislative record if you wanted to sort of elaborate on all that history and so forth. Whereas paragraph, I think, is pretty short. If you wanted a lot more in there, you could do that.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton, then Ms. Alto.
So, question. So you went to talk with Campbell, which I think was really very appropriate, but it's in Bayshore Clat. Did you do
They
any
did
outreach to them?
respond.
It wasn't on their agenda at all. Was there any outreach to Bayshore Clat?
There were 2 late public comments just received yesterday afternoon, one from Jacqueline LaFrance and one from another person. And I read the comments, and one was kind of lengthy, and I think it said that, hey, we went to the Bayshore Community Council and Tony Hoffman made a presentation, and we didn't like what he had to say. We want a bike pathway along the north part of the property. So maybe they went to the community council. I didn't go.
I didn't see it on the agenda, so I don't know if they were outreach. They said we don't care, we're done. Or
I can ask Mr. Grenier. Did you guys go to this month's Bayshore Clat Community Council meeting?
did not.
Okay, so they must have been the old one, which they're required to do by code.
Thank you. Ms. Alto.
Yes, thank you. I think it's important to note too that Francis was really good at explaining that as each new development piece on this property comes up, there will be an opportunity for if it's conditional use permit or something like that for the neighborhood to continue with the dialogue. Because I think that was one of the concerns is that, oh great, the rezone happens and now we're cut out of the process. We have no recourse. So that was one thing that we did discuss. If depending on whatever the use would be, we can't predict what the use will be. It's going to be limited by what's allowed in code. And the other is we did a lot of follow-up, or I did a lot of follow-up and reported back out to the Taku Campbell Community Council about traffic enforcement as well as looking at potentialities for sidewalks, and then they're working on looking at their capital improvement project list with regard to this area for any potential traffic impacts. So that kind of closes the loop of like the follow-up after the meeting. So just wanted to
May I just add?
Sure.
I did say that. Thank you for pointing that out. I just to clarify the first part of what you said. Some uses, some industrial uses are by right permitted uses, where there would be a building permit that a neighbor would have technically public access to see, but they wouldn't really have an opportunity to determine the outcome of a building permit. A conditional use permit in some of the uses are conditional uses, yes. But yeah, I think we went through the chart or what are the potential uses. Okay, yeah. So you would go before the Planning and Zoning Commission and state your concerns about buffering or the proposed use.
Thank you. Mr. Wells.
No, that was my point. I mean, there's quite a lot they could do, and they didn't do it.
Any other questions before I turn it over to see if there's any comments from the audience? Okay, seeing none, did you want to comment on this, sir?
Yes, my name is David Grenier with Tried Engineering. And just a couple comments that, as far as the trucks, the unfortunate situation that happened with the clearing contract. Once that was made aware to them, they did stop. But one thought we had is possibly at that intersection of Vernon and 96, maybe placing a sign that basically says no trucks allowed. Calling out, work up the language for that. But that might be a deterrent and basically put people that are 2 or 3 tiers away from the project saying, okay, this is residential street, we've got to find a different way. So that would be something we'd be open to. The other is on the sidewalk issue. As part of the fill and grade permit that we received, traffic engineering had a statement in here, an advisory comment. It says, when site is developed, there will be a requirement for a sidewalk to be installed along West 92nd property line and a driveway that meets commercial landing requirements from municipal driveway standards. So the sidewalk is when we come in with a site plan that locates the driveway and basically shows what is going on the project. Sidewalk will be tagged onto that permit. With that, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regard to the sidewalk, is that on the south? That would be on the south side, right? Of the
Correct.
Okay. And then on the signage, Mr. Schutte was very helpful, and we went around and around about truck signage. And the short answer is the traffic engineer says no, not right now, but it shouldn't become a problem. That there might be the potentiality for signage, but it seems like it's a very long, convoluted process.
Exactly.
Except for during construction periods where they could alert folks to the activity, if I remember correctly.
Through the chair, that's correct. And Francis was referring to that earlier on an approved haul route. Any deviations can lead to a suspension or revocation of the field permission.
And when we had the clearing and grubbing permit, we did not have that haul route shown. So it was, the drivers is what it came down to.
Thank you. Sir, did you want to comment on this?
No.
Okay. All right. Any other final thoughts or comments? It appears that we're going to be ready to vote on Tuesday. Just wanted to make sure we were ready. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and close this work session, and then see you guys at 2 o'clock.
The residential side. So